Good afternoon, evening, everybody. This is the Liberia Leadership Academy version of the Liberia History Channel. And today we will be focusing on King Momolu, the last great Kof king of the Kingdom of Congo. Now, you might be asking, well, when I hear the word Kondo, we often come up with thinking of Kondo Confederation. However, Kondo was more of a kingdom, and that is because of the fact that King Momolu was the focal point, and the tributary kings and leaders paid homage or deter leadership to King Momolu. So the Kondo is not really a confederation as we think of co-equal partnership. It's more of a kingdom because of the fact that King Momolu reigned supreme over all the other tributary rulers and kings in the region. So before I begin, I will be introducing the members and students of the Liberia Leadership Academy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trust Saley, youth facilitator for the Liberia Leadership Academy, and this is the focus on Liberia, which is the Liberia Leadership Academy is an addition of. So, welcome. It's nice to have you guys on board, and it's an honor for us to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lovely Zetia, one facilitator of the Liberia Leadership Academy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Enda Zota Wanta, student of the Liberia Leadership Academy. It's good to be here again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kura, a student of the Liberia Leadership Academy. Stay tuned. I want to say thank you for being with us.
Greetings, everyone. I'm student Isiaka Mayamu Sharif. I'm happy to be here always.
Thank you. So let's begin. So before we get into the presentation, let's just have the basic question. Why is King Momolu important, and why should Liberians and people who are watching know about him? Just a brief introduction.
Yeah, thanks for that question, uh, Jabari. So, the reason why Liberians need to know about King Momolu is because basically he's an ancestor of ours, and we have to know about ancestors like him. We have to know how great and powerful these kinds of people were. We have to know what were their roles and how they relate to our and how they related to affairs of the Liberian government at the time. Basically, we need to understand how these people lived, because once we understand how these people lived, we can learn from the way they lived, and we can use that as an inspiration for the way we live our lives and move on forward. Long story short, that's why it's important for Liberians today to learn about King Momolu, who was very powerful at the time.
Thank you.
And to add to
Yeah.
that,
So
it's important to study these people because we need to know what in Liberia at the time. So it's necessary to know what role they play and what they were doing during that time.
Zoda, can you repeat what you said? Because you went out for a second. So can you just repeat what you said? Finish your thoughts.
Okay, so I say it's important to study these people because we need to know what influence they have and what kind of role they played during their time when they were alive. Because they are our ancestors. So when we can know what they were alive, what kind of role they play, it help us to understand who we are and where we came from.
Thank you. And that is important. It's important for us to understand our history, our heritage, where we come from, and the people that made it possible. So let's introduce King Momolu, the king of the Kingdom of Congo. So one of the most important figures who we know about King Momolu is Benjamin J.K. Anderson. Now, for those who are new or maybe do not are not familiar with Benjamin J.K. Anderson, Benjamin J.K. Anderson was somebody who went into the interior and was really able to study and learn about the interior of the interior of Liberia today, such as Nimba, Bopolu, Bon, Lofa. He really went into the interior and really, studied and learned these cultures, learned the people's names, and that's how we know a lot of our kings today. And so one of them is, King Momoru. And so we get this through Boparu, which is the capital of the Botswana or Kondo country, and the usual residence of the king, Momoru's son, the king, was at this time residing at a large town called Totoquela, 8 miles northeast of Boparu. Now, again, this is a picture of Benjamin J.K. Anderson. Now, I want to ask you guys, is there a relationship between Boatswain and Momoru? And if so, can you explain that to the audience?
So, thanks, Jabari. Let me just come in for a second. I want us to, for the sake of structure, to stick to the slideshow as much as possible.
Mhm.
And also, if Paul can do the reading, that would
Turn
be
up.
great.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jabari?
Yes.
So yeah, so this slide is telling you about the capital city of the Congo country called Boboru. So Boboru was the capital city, and Boswi was also the father of the king to that particular country, the Kondo country. So this is telling you the the link. So Boboru is the capital of the Congo country. Bosu is the father of the king, the present king at that time, King Momoru. And the king was residing in another place because the Congo country was a very large place. It's a range from Boboru all the way from Poporu, present day Poporu, all the way to Nimba. So in the north. So you will see that he had another town called Totoquela where he built his houses and he was staying. And from Poporu to Totoquela, the slide is telling you that it was not that far. It was just like 8 miles. If you are walking 8 miles away from Poporu to Totoquela, was just 8 miles away. That was the distance.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay, let's
Basically,
let's
And
sti-
the,
let's stick to the slides, Jabari.
go ahead.
Stick to the narrative.
Here we go. So, Paul,
okay.
can you read that?
No problem, no problem. King Momoru of Boporo. A large piece of this granitic nisus forms a part of the grave of King Botswain, the present king's father, broken in such a way as to show the red, white, and gray in beautiful contrast. A little art might have rendered it a more worthy to mark so mighty a grave. So mighty a grave. Mighty person, Botswain.
Can you elaborate? Can you guys just elaborate what that
Yeah,
is
so
referring to?
so basically in this written excerpt here, Anderson was obviously or basically referring to Boatswain as the father of King Momoru's son. And how did King Momoru's son became the son of Boatswain? Well, I'll just give a little background on that. So after Boatswain was working on a British slave vessel as a crew member, he was later armed by the British to march into Boporo to stack his flag there to basically not only gain territory but to capture human beings for the purpose of slavery because this was a time period of where the slave trade was at an all-time high. And not only would he become a slave raider for these Europeans, he also managed to establish an alliance with these powerful Africans in the area of Bopuru, what we call Bapulu today. And the reason why the alliance was established with these powerful elite Africans is because at this time you also had these powerful African elites engaging in slavery, engaging in the slave trade. They engaged in the slave trade for the purpose of long distance trade. They would capture these human beings and use these human beings to transport commodities across long distances. So, boatswain being a middleman, it was the perfect opportunity for these powerful African elites to establish a relationship with boatswain. And how did they establish that relationship with boatswain? Boatswain married one of their daughters, which led to the which led to the birth of King Momoru's son. So
Thank you,
basically,
Paul.
yeah, he was a
And,
basically.
and so you emphasize the role of slavery. Can you go read the next quotation, because that really sort of elaborates what you were referring to.
Sure, no problem. Inconveniences and troubles frequently arise from this kind of relationship. Sensible of their numbers and strength, the slaves sometimes make a struggle for their liberty. In the latter part of 1866, at the death of Torsu, King Momoru's uncle, it became necessary to settle some debts pertaining to Torsu's estates. His relatives, to pay in order to pay off the claims, attempted to sell some of his slaves. These slaves were staying at a town called Musadala's town, southwest of Boporu. The attempt was resisted, some blood was shed, and a general revolt took place, in which all the slaves in the town determined to defend each other to the last extremity. So, like I said, at this time period, slave trade was at its all-time high. And Boporu was just not a place where you had powerful African elites, but it was an epic center or huge marketplace where a lot of transactions were going on. And these transactions involves commodities and at the same time slaves. This is why in the excerpt when it's where it says where the slaves where the number of slaves was sometimes larger than the population who were non-slaves, this was the case. It was a huge market center where slaves were going in and out, conducting long distance trades for these powerful African elites that resided in Boporo.
Yeah, so this is Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson giving his explaining to us when he was on his journey to Musagu, what he experienced, what things that he saw on his way to Musagu. So he's telling us that the person that they are referring to here as Torso is like an in-law to Boswin. The king is an in-law to Boswin, meaning the sister who Boswin got married to, the particular mentor is like a brother to is her brother. So Tosa is her brother. Now he had debts to pay, and because they were from this wealthy, powerful, strong family, they were also trading. They were into slave business, enslave people, and then at some point they take you out to sell. So at this point, Tosa had debts to pay, so they had to sell some of his slaves to pay his debt. And you can also imagine why Boswin, like my colleague just said, why Boswin is married to his sister, because remember, Boswin was also a slave dealer. So he would bring slave and also take slave and carry to these British people that empower him to come on this particular place, to come to this particular place.
And
Yes,
to add to that, so in the Esther you see that it says when they made attempt to sell these slaves to pay the debt, the slave resisted to be sold. The reason sometimes is because where you are is more better in terms of safety. If they sell you to somebody, you don't know what you're going to see. It's going to be a situation when you've been sold. So they had to put a defense so that they can be sold. They were like, we can fight to our last breath, but we will not agree to be sold to anybody.
Do you think it's more of that they
And
feel
I just
comfortable,
want to
or do you think it has to deal with
add
sort of a
something quickly
human
we are
being
forgetting about.
sense of controlling one's destiny? Zota.
I didn't get that. Can you say that again, please?
Yeah, so I asked, do you think it's more to do with the fact that the slaves were comfortable with where they were, or it was just familiar to them, or do you think they were revolting due to maybe freedom or their desire to be free or dignity?
No, they were not comfortable. So they were also trying to see how best they can be free. But being sold to somewhere else was more dangerous than finding let me say finding freedom to where you are. You can fight to free yourself. But if you've been sold, you might either mine and then it become more risky for you than where you are. Now that they were comfortable to where they were, no.
Well, there's it's a little bit of both, guys. So you are in a place where you have established relationships. You might have children. You might have familiarity. You have formed family bonds with people, and then they're going to take some of you and sell you to unknown places. Maybe split up husbands and wives. Maybe split people from their children, their loved ones, people they've grown attached to. Now you're going to somewhere where you might not be as familiar with the language and customs to be held in unknown and uncertain conditions. So Sorsu had debts. They never are clear about where these debts were. It could have been as far away as Mali or Gambia. The bottom line is these people did not want to leave. They wanted freedom, of course, but they did not want to be enslaved again in an unfamiliar place.
Exactly so. You just said it right.
Let's move on.
All right, I'll read. I arrived at Zulu on the 8th of July. Here it was that the Mandingo guide, Bie, according to the instructions that had been given to him by King Momoru, was to spend a couple of weeks in trying to reconcile the differences between the Bonzes and the Barline people. Zulu was also the town belonging to the young chief who had covertly assisted the Barline people and who was now suffering the penalty of his perfidy. He was confined at Salagi, a large, and that's where it ends. All yours now, Jabari.
Yeah, so oh, hmm, yeah, that's where that ends.
Yeah, that's where it ends.
Yep. So can you describe what is being described, particularly in this passage, talking about the town of Zolu, and what's the significance of that town?
So this is the
Okay.
significance of
Okay,
this
Edward.
slide is to tell you that Anderson is also telling you that despite not being honor certain people, let's say for instance, you had King Mumu who was the king for the Kondo country. While he was also visiting the Kondo country, he saw that the king will always try to settle differences between different people, different towns, different tribes. He was always willing to settle conflicts between them because he knew that they were one. So you have the Busi and the Berlin people that have problem, and honestly witness the king send so that these things, this the problem they have could be resolved.
Okay, so the Busis are what we call Lama people today, right?
Exactly so.
Yes.
Loma people.
So,
And to add to that, this is also showing how powerful Kimomoru was. Trying to sort out differences among his people under his territory, in his territory under his control. Things can go off,
and,
man. So as a
yeah, and
very
you can
powerful
only
person.
do that if you're in charge, right? You can only settle disputes among your subjects if you are in charge. Can you mute if you're not talking? You can only settle disputes among your subjects, right? To give the respect to you to be the judge, the ultimate voice to calm disputes. You have to be you're not co-equal. You're the king above kings. So if you're able to dispense justice to other kings, this is not really a federation. This is a kingdom. This is an empire. Those kings, we have, you know, based on Anderson's testimony, those kings are doing what? They're paying taxes to Momoru. They're also allowing Momoru to be the final voice of judgment, of law. So he's able to settle disputes. So everything is pointing to the fact that this Condo Federation is really a kingdom. And Momoru is in charge. And it's overwhelming because, as Zomope said earlier, this is a vast territory stretching from what we consider to be the Mono River today all the way to western Nimba, covering vast distances into Bong and Lofa and all these areas. So this is more territory, more human beings than the Liberian government controls. More land and more people than the Liberian government controlled in 1868. This is very important. This is one man with more command and control and power than the entire government of Liberia after independence, well into the 1800s until his death, right? So it's very important to focus on it. Let's continue, please. Thank you.
As soon as Kafal started for
Yeah,
Bessie,
I just want,
uh,
Go ahead, Mom.
as soon as Kafal started for Bessestown, I resolved to pay my respects to King Momoru. I arrived at Totoquela or Totokole, is correctly pronounced, on May 7th, 1868. I was kindly received and at once stated to the king that I would have been to see him much sooner, but that I was a stranger in his country and had supposed that he resided at his reputed capital, Bopuru. That when I came to that town, I was informed that he had gone elsewhere. He replied that he was accustomed to divide his time between the two towns, sometimes residing at Bopuru and sometimes staying at Totokole. I then informed him of the object of my visit. I then informed him of the object of my visit and had to frame such an account of my former proceedings as to show that it had always been my intention to come to his country, but that I had been thwarted by many untoward circumstances. So, this excerpt here is another testament to how powerful King Momoru was, in the sense that you had a diplomat coming from the Liberian government telling him ahead of time that he's coming to visit him. He could have just went there without informing him, but why would you have to tell someone and inform them of your arrival? You only do that to a person when they are of high power and when they are of high respect. This is something this is something very important for every Liberian to understand as they're saying this. King Momoru was a very powerful person who not only had command over a vast region, but he also conducted large trades. And the Liberian government acknowledged how powerful he was to the point that they had to inform him of their arrival anytime if they went to meet him, such as the case of Benjamin J.K. Anderson. So that's the important part I wanted to point out from this excerpt that was written here.
Excellent observation, Paul. And even though this is not about Anderson's narrative of a journey to Musadu, we'll cover that in the future. It is also extremely important to point out that Anderson, I'm sorry, I was getting feedback. It's also very important to point out that Anderson was behaving in a manner in which he was almost dealing with some force or power, a sovereign body more powerful than the one he represented. Before Anderson entered this area, there was a wall of what they call non-penetration. You could not, the government of Liberia was never allowed. No white missionary, no British, no French, no one was allowed entry into Momoru's territory without his permission. Anderson's delegation was the first outside group to be allowed in. So it wasn't only just about announcing his arrival, it's that Momoru orchestrated his entry even before he came. If you remember, by reading the narrative journey of Musadu, the guides that were taking him there, until they got permission, did not even allow him to correctly enter into Boku. They were playing all kinds of games with him, right?
Exactly. So yeah, one of
So
his aides.
Anderson's the first to have a delegation, a foreign delegation from the Liberian government to be able to enter. So they did recognize not even recognized, but respected the sovereignty of King Momoru and the command that he had over this vast territory, which was larger than the territory that was controlled by the Liberian government. Thank you, Paul. That was very good.
Yes. Welcome. Polygamy is the general practice all over Africa, as in most Oriental countries. Momoru, like the Sultan of Turkey and the Viceroy of Egypt, has his harem and numerous wives. But he remarked to us that this wife palaver was a great humbug to the country, as it was the occasion of a great outlay of money to keep up such extensive establishments. He said that he did not know one half of his wives. He knew that he had over 300, but he seldom saw more than half a dozen, though he was obliged to support them all. That as they were mostly the daughters of powerful chiefs, he dared not divorce them without sufficient reason. He said, however, that he would like to see the practice discontinued, but it could not be done by himself. His children might be able to effect such a revolution. The girls, he added, must be educated. Want to come in, Zamuket?
Yeah, okay. So this is again very important because the slide is telling you King Momoru has 300 wives, in which King Momoru told that the woman blooding that he know one half, in fact half of the 300 women, which is just six, that he was actually in serious interaction with, but he knew some of these people. And the point here is, if King Momoru has 300 wives, we gotta be thinking as to how many grandchildren, how many ancestors, how many descendants Kimomodo has up to today. I might be one, because if you are looking at what we're talking about, it means you might have many children, many descendants coming to today. But because we are not going to the history to know who Momodu were and what he did and what role he played, so we don't understand where we are. It's very important to know. And then another point here is the man in 18 something is talking about education, telling that the woman blind that these girls need to go to school, they must be educated. He was thinking about the future during that time. And it was very important to know.
A man before his time. And again, just to emphasize, this is Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was
Okay.
once professor of the University of Liberia, president of the University of Liberia, and also professor. But Dr. Blyden is talking about his visit to Bopulu the year that King Momoru died, and his encounter and his discussions with King Momoru. The most profound thing that I see here is twofold. He was a polygamist who thought polygamy was wrong. It was outdated. He also believed that the girl should be educated. This is profound. This is a man speaking in the year 1870 to 8. I think this actually happened in 1870, but Leiden published his book in 1871. So he's here talking in the year 1870, not 1970, not 2024, 1870. More than 100 and what, 50, about 154 years ago. You have this ancestor from 154 years ago saying the girls must be educated. This is before Thomas Sankara said women hold up half the sky, right?
Yes.
Exactly
Yes.
so.
Here is a very wise man. And Blyden also points out that polygamy is a general practice all over Africa, as in most Oriental countries. And, because Oriental basically means Asian. So it's basically what he's saying is this is an Islamic thing. This is a Muslim custom. King Momoru was a Muslim. But polygamy, though accepted in Islam, is not mandatory. It's not mandatory. It's optional. And he's saying here's the better option, in his opinion. Educate these
Yes.
girls. What we're doing with so many wives. So I think it's powerful, and I think that a lot of our modern people need to read this and understand how ahead of its time and before its time. Because it's always been like this. No, we've always had thinking people among us, thinking leaders, forward thinking leaders, looking into the future.
Yes.
When Western countries in 1870 were still saying women shouldn't learn to read and write, they should just be in the house. Western countries that think they're so advanced and civilized, here you have a philosopher, a scholar, a king saying the girls must be educated.
Yes.
So that's a quote. Whenever you hear people quoting, who did they quote? Who y'all can be quoting? All kind of people from all over Africa. Here is one of our kings for you to quote. The quote: "The girls must
Yeah.
be educated.
The girls must be
The
Right.
educated.
girls must be educated." King Momoru Stan. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Another thing I really like about this slide, that's why him having 300 wives. He said he would love that this particular practice discontinue, but it could not be done by himself. Remember, the women he got married to were their parents were powerful. So I think he was actually looking at the aftermath. If he tried to leave any of them, he never wanted tension and all of that. He actually did it, but he never wanted it to continue. But I really take that very important also.
Mhm. And I just want to say before we move on is that the thing that also spoke to me was he said he was obliged to support them all, and he dare not divorce them without sufficient reason, indicating that
Yes.
he has to treat these women with dignity and respect. He just can't have these wives and just discard them whenever he feels like it's an obligation, it's his duty, and that just shows somebody who has value and respect and honor.
And also, I
Yeah.
believe, just to wrap up on that, also, I believe he didn't want to divorce them because he believed they would have severed the powerful connections he had made with other kings. Also, that's what I believed. But moving on, a few days east of Boporo, wool of an excellent quality abounds. King Momoru informed us that a few months ago, a wealthy chief about a week's journey distant sent him a very fine sheep covered with luxuriant wool, with the message that if Momoru would order him, he could furnish any number of such sheep. The king says he took great care of the sheep to see if it would live and thrive, but notwithstanding all his care, it died after a few weeks. He showed us fine woolen cloth manufactured in the interior and presented me with the skin of the sheep. Since my arrival in town, the wool has been pronounced of first rate quality by connoisseurs. So basically, what this excerpt is talking about is basically saying that the region that King Momoru had powerful control over was blessed with qualitative resources, ranging from wool to cloths to gold, any other good quality commodities. And these commodities were all traded across long distances with human chattel, the same human chattel in the slave trade that we talked about earlier. It basically tells us how wealthy that region is. And once you get to understand how wealthy a place like this is, it makes you to further understand why at that time European imperialism was so high. Not to strip away from the topic, but yeah, that's what
And
the
Yeah.
extra bit. Yeah,
and to add to that, this is also saying that besides the gold, the ivory and the agricultural product they were selling, King Momodu Kingdom was also manufacturing cloths, beautiful country cloth and cotton that they were selling. They were making trade out of. So they were not just there. They were also they had skills that they could produce country cloth from cotton and sell them for money.
Yes, so that you're right. That's why I wanted to have said it means our people we've been having skilled people from time immemorial. right? So our people have been skilled people. They were not only there selling slaves, but I mean, there were people who were talented and fixing country clubs and these things. No wonder why these people, I'm talking about the Europeans and the British and other people were just trying to come and get these things.
Excellent. Right, move on.
We can move
Mhm.
on to the next slide. Um,
So this is just an example of one of the bridges that Anderson crossed, and also that Edward Wilmot Blyden, Dr. Blyden would have crossed as well in the 1870s. Right. So you've got one of these bridges demonstrated here. This photo was taken in around 1945, but this is the same traditional suspension bridge that has been engineered to cross rivers for many, 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 many generations. And I just thought it was interesting. I've
It's
never
very interesting.
crossed this type of what we call commonly called monkey
Okay,
bridge,
okay,
Monkey
but it's
Bridge.
actually an engineering. It's actually an engineering marvel. It's a suspension bridge, meaning it's not being held up by anything underneath it. It's on the side, and it's amazing. So I just wanted to share that in the slide. We can go on to the next one. Paul, continue.
okay. A
Now,
few days.
before you read, I do want to point out to everybody the difference in the spelling of protocole between Blyden and Anderson, but it's the same town. And Blyden, Dr. Blyden calls Bopolu or Boporu, Boporo, the capital of the Poro, Boporo, the head of the Poro, the seat of the Poro, Boporo, instead of Bopolu or Boporu. Blyden, Dr. Blyden, who was more familiar with the language, the spelling is probably closer to correct. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, no problem. A few days after our arrival at Boporo, the king invited us to accompany him to his half-town Totokore, about 8 miles east of Boporo. Early on the morning of January 4th, he sent us word that he would be ready to start for the said half-town immediately after breakfast. We accordingly prepared ourselves and were ready at the time designated. The king set out attended by a long train of warriors and servants. In the company was the famous Fakwekwe with his retinue. The king, with his Liberian guests on each side, walked in front of the procession. On the way, we passed through several villages and one finely barricaded town. The king's approach to each town or village was announced by the firing of guns on the part of the inhabitants. And at the entrance, he was always met by a band of singers and dancers with instrumental music who escorted him to a prominent seat in an open space so as to allow all the people to see him. So basically, in this excerpt, basically displays how it basically displays how King Momoru was not only powerful but was symbolic in a sense that he walked from town to town, which was a symbol of his presence and his power. He wasn't being carried in a hammock, like we always saw other figures, but in his case, he walked, as walking was a sign of power and strength, which is another testament to his characteristics. But yeah, that's what basically this excerpt entails. Did you guys get that?
Mhm.
Okay.
And I'm saying, in addition to that, you can see in the slide that he was being greeted by his people that came to await him, dancing and taking him to the square of the city or the town. That shows how respected he was. He was very respected and honored in his place. And then to prove that his strength, he walked from town to town. He didn't allow pride or wealth to take him away to mistreat his people. He was very generous. He would walk with his people, enter the town, greet them, and the people will come to greet him because you're respected and honored as a man that was leading them.
Yes. They show how It shows how systematic his, let me just say, his government were. So before meeting the king, you have protocol to pass through. You're not just walk and go meet the king. You will meet people. They will have to go and tell the king, you have this person, I want to see you. Then he will schedule time that he's going to be free for he to see you. So our people from day one, imagine in the 80s, how systematic they were in leading or ruining themselves.
So when
Excellent.
you said the
And this
80s,
is
did you
so
mean to say the
called
80s?
These are the
Eight,
80s.
yeah,
The 1800s?
1800,
Hundreds.
1800s, in the
Yeah, the
1800s.
80s are dual time.
So
So
yeah, yeah, okay.
let's go on. So this is just a map showing the difference, modern map showing the difference with the distance. And on the modern Google Maps, it's 7.61 miles, which is really exactly 8 miles, depending on which part of Bopuru you start and which part of Total Color you go to, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
So the
Mm,
yeah,
towns are still
Right.
there. Over 150 years later, the towns are still there.
Exactly so. After exchanging salutations with the principal men, the
in
king
a
would
walking
invite.
distance.
Oh,
Yes, that's why they walk. It's walking distance. That's why they walk.
mm.
all right. After exchanging salutations with the principal men, the king would inquire through his spokesman the news in the village. The presiding headman then stepped forward and walked around the square, talking all the while telling the news. After which the principal women would come out and, having danced gracefully before the king, would come forward and shake his hand, making at the same time a very low bow. So
Okay.
okay, yeah, you can come in,
So so
Zobo.
so this is again saying that King Momolu was very powerful and respected. So when they refer to principal men and women, these are people of high influence. These are wealthy people. Yeah, and then to tell you that he had concern for his people when reaching the town, he will ask, "What's the news in the town or in that village?" You want to know how the people are doing there. So if there's issue, then he can be able to resolve it before leaving. And when these women will come, powerful and wealthy women will come to greet him, dance and greet him in a systematic order. That shows how grateful, how great and respectful Kimumolu was.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So
so
there
there
you
was an entire protocol put into place. And the
yes.
spokesman we are talking about here for the benefit of our audience, we're talking about spokesman. Let's just take this for, our dispensation right now. A spokesperson is, looks like an information minister, right? Right? An information arm of the government. So this is a person that the king is going to take, or is going to gather every information from. If you want to get to the king, if you want to say anything to the king, whatever you want, you can just pass through the identical spokesperson, and he is the one that's going to convey the message to the king. So it speaks to the fact that our people were very organized. Talking about King Momo, right? Were very organized during that time. So I don't know. Today, when I sit down and I hear people talking about our people were inferior, anyway, that's another disinformation. So that's to tell you how powerful and how 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 courageous and how
It looks like our GSM companies are cutting people in and out. Let's move on to the next slide.
Onward we move. I was struck with the great deference and respect paid by these people to their rulers, a point in which Liberians would do well to follow their example. But they have the advantage of us in never having been under foreign masters, in never having imbibed a sense of inferiority or a feeling of self depreciation. They have never had to look up to white men for anything, so as to form in their minds comparisons between themselves and other disparaging to themselves. They are entirely free from the mental and moral trammels which the touch of the Caucasian has imposed on us, and they are at large from the operation of a great many other nameless influences. which clog our progress in the march to independence and self reliance. Powerful. So basically, what this excerpt is saying is that African people at that time period that never left the continent, they were never exposed to a sense of self inferiority. They never had a negative mindset about themselves. They never had low self esteem. They believed
So
that they,
I want to
okay,
come in for a second, Paul.
yeah, sure, no problem.
I just want you to be careful in what you're saying, because is he talking about all African people, or is he specifically talking about the people of Kingdom Condo?
The people of Kingdom Condor.
Because the people on the coast are also African people, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so we just want to be careful how we saying things and speak specific. He's talking about these particular people that he encountered.
understood.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so as my mentor was saying, as it is written in the excerpt, the people within the Bopuru region, they never had a sense of low self-esteem. They never had a sense of self-inferiority complex. They always kept their heads high. They believed that they were civilized. They believed that they were capable of doing things for themselves, and they did not look up to outsiders to do things for them. They had activities going for themselves, and that's how it's always been before the existence of a Liberia. So before there was a Liberia, these people were already having their own complex customs with their own structured society. So that's what this excerpt says.
So what I will also say to you, or ask all of you, King Momoru's father and mother were two different kind of people. Do you think King Momoru's father would have had this level of understanding about himself?
Based on Boatswain's background, no. Because and the reason why I say no is because in the previous slide when we talked about Boatswain working on a slave vessel, we also have to understand that Boatswain has been working on that slave vessel since he was a child. We don't know the definite age he was at the time, but working in that kind of environment, I think it's safe to say Boatswain never saw himself or had that positive perception about himself.
Excellent.
Yeah, so yeah, he actually did not have that positive expectation about himself because he was working on this British vessel and he saw how Africans were being treated. So obviously he would not think of himself the way uh, his wife thought about herself.
Going to Boku and erecting British flag, in the year 1807, doing things like that. But I would like to think, there's no way for me to know this, but I would like to think that coming into Boparu and having the influence of his wife and King Torsu's father, his father-in-law, and those people would have changed his thinking. I would like to think that that may have been some of the influence that caused him, this very violent warrior who said that he was responsible for cutting off King George's head at Cape Meserado. I would like to think that Boatswain was favorable to the repatriated people because he had become enlightened through the influence of these people. King Torsu's father, his wife's father. I would like to think so.
It's possible. The town of Totokore, built by Momoru for his own residence before he came to the throne, is beautifully situated at the southern base of a very high hill. It is surrounded by a barricade impregnable to any native force. Upon this town, the king has spent a great deal of time and labor in building it up and adorning it. The houses are of the same character as those at
I'm
Boporo.
sorry. Can you guys mute if we can't hear Paul? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, everything's good now. It is surrounded by a barricade impregnable to any native force. Upon this town, with the king, upon this town, the king has spent a great deal of time and labor in building it up and adorning it. The houses are of the same character as those at Boporo. The streets, however, are much wider and not so winding as in the capital. The public square is also larger and in better order. Here, as I have stated above, the king has for his own residence a two-story frame building furnished in American style.
So this is basically saying and describing um Toto Kole where Kimomolu was residing. And then it's describing how beautiful the place were and then how he built a two-story building to live in it. And then it takes me back to when people say our people are not doing anything in this place, Central Kinta. Here is Kimomolu building two-story building to reside in it at that time. This is also very great.
Yeah, and Dr. Blading is also doing comparison with the house, saying that the house is well built and furnished in an American style. King Momoru has not traveled out of that place to go to Europe so that he can learn how to build houses he saw in Europe in his own country or town that he was controlling. But then they already had that mindset. They knew how to to build their own place in a very comfortable way, a place that will suit them. You just sit down and just think, I want my house like this, and they start to build their houses in that form. And now Dr. Blading is saying the way he saw it, he was actually he needed to be shocked because these people they are not traveling out of that particular place to go to Europe to see styles of houses, but yet they can build such style right here without going outside. Many of our people, they were so brilliant. Our ancestors were brilliant.
Now, I do want to
And that is
say
why
that
most of
this is the 1860s, right? So you have had many generations of influence of different people living, some of his trade partners. This is a man who was engaged in long distance trade, like his father, his grandfather, his great grandfather, great great grandfather, all the way to Senegambia, Mali, to the coast. So you also have a situation where they're interacting with slave traders like Pedro Blanco, who had huge forts built at Galinas. You have him interacting with, you had Americans who had houses long before ACS, British who had houses. So some of this is actually European and American influence because they were trading with people for many, many centuries, right?
Exactly, so I wanted to say
Yeah,
So
just
you can't say that because he did not travel, he did travel. He didn't just stay in Boplu. He might have gone to Europe, but Europe definitely had come to him. So he did have examples, and that was not the only house that was built before 1822 that was two-story and in European style, because we all know that the location where Hotel Africa is, where Robertsport is, there were similar structures. In fact, Boswick had an actual mansion on the St. Paul River before ACS arrived. Boswick being a British slave trader. So we know a lot of these things already. So not that they hadn't seen anything, is that Dr. Blyden had not been there, but they had been to where Dr. Blyden was coming from.
okay.
yeah,
We can
thank you,
continue,
Mrs. Franco.
please.
yeah, so this is basically a structure or what which is no longer this is a wall structure at Zozo which served as a protective barrier during the 1800s within the Bopo region. During
So
19, yeah, okay.
I would date these doors or walls back a few centuries, not just the 1800s, but these are remnants of the wars. These defense walls, contrary to what people believe, people think they was there for. I've heard some people say, "Oh, it's because of colonialism. They were trying to protect themselves from colonial." No, this was about wars. These were defense walls, and so people were fighting wars long, long, long before Europeans came there. And Benjamin Anderson describes these walls being around the cities, the major cities, all in the interior. Zozo had a wall around it. Totokala had a wall around it. All these places were surrounded by these massive walls as as a measure of defense. And many of these walls, in fact, the remnants of these walls were systematically dismantled in the 1940s and 50s. Before the 1940s and 50s, most of these walls were still erected, even the ruins of them around these towns. The reason they chose to dismantle them and destroy them is unknown to me, probably to destroy history as usual. But fortunately, they were described by Anderson, by Blyden, and others, and they were also photographed, as you can see here. So we don't have much left. There's some remnants of the walls in Lofa, but they were all over in Cape Mount, in what is now considered to be Bong in Nimba, all over the Condo territory. They had these walls around cities. And here you have an actual photograph of the ruins of one of the walls before it was completely dismantled.
All right. Totokole was headed by Fakwekwe, described as belligerent chieftain, whose warlike operations spread terror through the Gola country. He was a man about 5 feet 7 inches high, inclined to corpulence. He had a large head and neck, prominent forehead, large full eyes, light scattered whiskers. He was rapid in his utterance, with nervous movement of hands and feet, and apparent restless temperament. He was the first cousin to King Momoru, as they were the children of two sisters. Gatumbe Giatamba was related to them.
And who was the brother to the two sisters? King who? King
King
Tor. Go ahead.
King Torsu,
Yeah, so King Torsu was their sister. And Gatamba or Kiatamba was also the relative, right?
yes.
So we talk about ethnicity being fluid,
Mm.
the fluidity of ethnicity. What ethnic background do you think these people had?
Getamba was Gola and King Momoru was Maninka. And even though they are
How do you
related,
know this?
good question. So I'll start off with King Momoru. So for King Momoru, we know his father, Boatswain, to be a Bola man from Shaba, which is in present day Sierra Leone. And in the excerpts written by Benjamin J.K. Anderson, it was stated it was King Momoru was stated to be a Maninka person. So this basically tells us that his mother was Maninka. So even though his father was a Bala man from Shabar,
Wait,
present day Sierra Leone,
pause for 1 second. How do you know that they were Maninka?
so we know King Momoru was Maninka based on the written excerpt by Benjamin J.K. Anderson, who described him to be a Mandingo or Maninka.
So do you think that Anderson knew the difference between a Mandingo man and a Vai man? Or do you think he knew the difference?
Well, that's I think you would know the difference if they then again that's a
I don't think Anderson knew the difference.
He never knew the difference
Okay, we'll find
because
out
they
in
did.
a little bit. We'll find out a little bit later in the presentation. But let's continue.
okay. So Fakwekwe expressed himself as being heartedly tired of war and anxious for the establishment of peace in the country, that trade and other improvements might go forward. He resided when young for some time in Monrovia, where he acquired a knowledge of English, which he speaks with ease and fluency. He is anxious to have schools established at Sublong, his place of residence, near the coast, about a day's walk northwest of Monrovia. As a proof of his earnestness and pledge of his specific intentions, he gave two of his sons to Mr. N.A. Richardson to be brought up and instructed by him, and promised soon to send his eldest son to be prepared for admission to Liberia College. So there are two things the excerpt talks about here, right? War and education of indigenous people in the within the region of Bopuru. But let's quickly talk about the war. So at this point in time, most of the wars that we call the Roaring Wars that were happening at that time period was due to the slave trade. After the slave trade had been abolished by the British and Americans, people within or close to the Bopo region, like the bar lines, the bar line people, they basically couldn't bring slaves to the coast to sell because before the transatlantic slave trade was banned, these people would bring slaves down to the coast to sell to European dealers. But after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished, these people could no longer march slaves down to the coast, meaning they would not be able to make a profit. So, in order to continue making a profit, they had to acquire vast territory by force. So that way they could get more people to not only be enslaved, but to carry out long distance trade for these lesser kings. So that way they could be able to make a profit. Long story short, they wanted to be as powerful, just like King Momoru, who was already powerful in conducting long distance trade with human chattel slavery. So basically, the reasons for these wars was due to the slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade was abolished. These lesser kings needed to find an alternative to keep their slave venture business going, so they decided to conquer more territory, get more people as human chattel slavery to conduct long distance trade to be able to make more profit. And in addition to that, you still had people, even though they were not incorporated within the Liberian government, they still wanted their children to go to school. They wanted them to learn English because, not to be offensive, there's a sentiment today in present day Liberia that native children weren't allowed to go to school. But here we have a region that wasn't even a part of the Liberian government, where the Liberian government were not only accepting of children to go to school, but you had the indigenous people that were within this region that were anxious to send their children to school. So that's what this excerpt talks about.
So if they were not part of the Liberian government, what were they?
They had their own country. They were autonomous. They had their own laws and structures. They
Thank
had
you.
their, yeah.
Let's continue.
In several conversations which I had with Fakwekwe about his wars, I could not help noticing that his arguments for carrying them on were precisely those used by men who aspire to military distinction elsewhere. We are sometimes disposed to pass wholesale and indiscriminate condemnation upon the natives on account of their warlike operations. We fancy that they ought to see that it is ruinous to their country, and we become impatient and anxious to carry expeditions among them to chastise them for their belligerent tendencies. So, Pezota, you want to come in? Oh, okay. Turns out they're not here.
So excellent. Let's move on. Let's go on to the next slide, Jabari.
Okay. Just zoom in a bit for me, Jabari. Dear sir,
If you have access to the letter other than on the slide, Paul, you can read it from there. It might
no,
be easier.
I can read it from here, and I just needed a
Okay.
quick. Dear
All
sir,
right. And then the
dear.
other thing I want to point out before you come in, Paul, is I want you to talk about this is a letter Dr. Blyden wrote
Okay.
so that they understand the letter.
Okay. Yes. So basically, this is a letter that Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden wrote uh, in the year of 1876 to Harrisburg. What the letter is about, I'm about to read now. Dear sir, soon after I closed my letter this morning, a young man from Boporo called to see me. He is a nephew of the king and is down here now on some trading business. I was struck with his clear and intelligible English and asked him where he learned to speak English. He replied that he was one of the boys whom the late King Momoru gave me in 1870 to begin a school with. An account of the opening of this school is given in a little book called The People of Africa. The school in which he was taught has been suspended for more than 2 years, but he says that he and his schoolmates keep up their studies. He has come to beg me in the name of the king and his people to re-establish the school. There is one interesting fact about Boporo. Though there are many Mohammedans in that region, the king is not favorable to that religion and prefers his people to become Christians. So all the relatives of the kings are striving hard to learn English. None are allowed to learn Arabic. They all read and write the Vey language. Here is a most encouraging opening. They are begging for schools. For my part, if the board would sanction it, I would like to answer their call at once by sending Kennedy out to open a school and occupy the ground till we are able to carry on larger operations. Meanwhile, I have sent a present to the king urging him to send us some boys to be trained here as teachers. They are very apt and learn readily. I hope our board will see its way clear to encourage this work. It is a most important one, and from it, most valuable results may occur to the interior. The people out there, both Mohammedans and pagans, seem to have great confidence in me and would be willing to join heartily in every measure of improvement. Yours very respectfully, Edward Wilmot Blyden. So basically, this letter that Edward wrote was for the establishment and an operation. Well, basically, not operation, not only operation, but it was for the establishment, operating, and the incorporating of indigenous children to go to school. That's what the letter basically says here from Edward Wilmot Blyden. Yeah, you're muted, Jabari. Okay. Death of King Momoru. Okay, so in this excerpt here, this is a excerpt of a letter written by James Irving Smith. Uh, Not basically a letter, but an announcement.
Let's go back to the Blyden letter a little bit.
All right, let's go back.
Does anyone have any comments or insights from that is giving you into a window into our history?
Or questions?
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, we just okay. I don't think anyone has any comments. Then we can go forward. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So as I was saying, so basically this is an excerpt from a letter that James Irving Smith, who was president of Liberia at the time after the forceful removal of Edward James Roy, that he wrote to the legislature regarding the death of King Momoru. So, death of King Momoru. On the 23rd of November, a communication was received from Benzela Quella, chief of the Kondo people, in which he informs the government that J.W. Tucker, a schoolmaster employed by the Episcopal Mission, was captured at Totokore. On the 2nd, on the 2nd of the month by Weta, chief of the Bondi people, who gained possession of the town but were repulsed. Demand, can you go to the next one?
Mhm.
Demand was made by the government on Weta for the immediate release of Mr. Tucker, and Bengale Quella was directed to send him forthwith to Monrovia. Though Bengala Quella subscribes himself as the chief of the condos, yet he endeavors by subterfuge, according to the native custom, to conceal the death of Momoru's son. We regret to hear of the demise of Prince Momoru. He was a man of signal ability as a ruler of his people, and the government might have made him an active ally in extending our trade and dominion interior ward. So basically, King Momoru's son had passed away in 1871 on the 23rd of November. What was the cause of his death? We do not know. But going forward, he was a great ally of the Liberian government, and Skirving Smith believed more could have been done with him had he been alive. But yeah, that's what basically the excerpt talks about.
President James Irving.
President James Skirving Smith. That's what he was
Exactly.
basically saying.
And that wraps up our presentation of King Momoru. So, Paul, to conclude, what is the most important thing you got from this presentation by King Momoru?
One of the most important thing I got from this presentation, even though there was some other details left out about King Momoru was not only a powerful figurehead in the region of Boburu, but he was a man of sound judgment, and he was highly intelligent. And Liberians need to understand this. They need to understand how not only powerful he was, but he was very intelligent, and he's an ancestor of ours. So that legacy of intelligence belongs to us. It doesn't only belong to people outside Africa, but it belongs to us within this region of Africa, Liberia. So that's the most important thing for me.
Thank you. All right, y'all. That concludes our presentation of King Momoru, the great, powerful King Momoru of the.
Are there any comments or questions, Jabari?
Nope, there are
Okay.
no comments. Well, except Umoja was in the building, so let's
Hey,
give a shout.
Moja. Okay.
And then, of course, Adam Dorley, thank you for tuning in. There are no other questions or comments. Thank you guys for tuning into the Liberia Leadership Academy edition of the Liberia History Channel. And of
Yeah.
course, we did King Momoru. We got plenty of more segments coming up in the future.
We're going to focus on Benjamin Joseph Knight Anderson next before we proceed with the president. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank you.
guys, and we'll
Honor
see
to
you
be here.
next week.
All right.